Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring the world of Spotify, a platform I think you're pretty familiar with, judging by this impressive stack of articles and research you've given me.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to unpack here. It's amazing how Spotify's whole rise kind of mirrors the music industry's chaotic shift from physical media to, the digital age.
Totally. And get ready to go way beyond those catchy playlists to discover what's really going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we'll be looking at how they navigated those thorny copyright issues, the impact of algorithms, and how they've kind of positioned themselves in this new landscape.
Exactly. So let's start by rewinding back to Spotify's origins. Do you remember the days of Napster and the Pirate Bay? Illegally downloading music was almost a rite of passage back then.
Yeah, I remember, well, Spotify kind of emerged during that Wild West era, presenting their ad-supported free tier and subscription model as the solution to all this piracy.
Right? They were like the knights in shining armor coming to save the music industry. But was it really a win-win for everyone? You've given me some information suggesting there were other forces at play, like pressure from the U.S. government on Sweden to tackle piracy.
Yeah, the research points to that pressure coinciding with Spotify's rise. And there's actually a pretty interesting detail in here. The Swedish police officer who led the raid on the Pirate Bay in 2006, when he ended up working for Warner Bros.
Wow. Talk about a career change. It seems like there were some interesting connections and motivations going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And even Spotify's own path wasn't exactly a straight line. They experimented with different models, trying to be a social platform, then an app marketplace, then this music for every moment hub. Each time they promised to empower artists, but did they really deliver?
That's the big question. Some sources like the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter reported that major labels actually received much higher payouts than independent artists, despite owning a smaller percentage of the music on Spotify.
Hmm. Yeah, that definitely raises questions about who benefits most from this whole system. Which brings us to another fascinating aspect of Spotify playlists. They become a defining feature, influencing what we listen to, how we discover new music. But, this whole curated listening experience has a history that goes way beyond Spotify.
Oh, definitely. We went from the personal touch of mixtapes to these massive, algorithmically driven playlists. It's a huge shift in how we experience music.
You got it. The history of playlists is surprisingly rich and diverse,
Hmm.
from the intimate act of making a mixtape for a friend to the calculated control of radio programming. Spotify seems to have kind of combined both taking that mixtape feeling and merging it with the commercial logic of radio.
Yeah, it's like they professionalized the mixtape, but with a profit motive woven in. It reminds me of when iTunes tried something similar with iMix, where users could create and sell playlists. But critics argued that it was basically exploiting user-generated content for commercial gain.
That seems to be a recurring theme. So let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that might not be immediately obvious. Mood music Spotify is overflowing with playlists for every mood imaginable, from relaxing jazz to focus beats to sleep sounds.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. My Chill Vibes playlist is a lifesaver after a long day. What's the story behind this explosion of mood music?
Well, what's really interesting is how Spotify's emphasis on what we might call functional music really blurs the lines between artistic expression and commercial manipulation. Think back to Muzak, the background music you hear in elevators and stores designed to influence mood and behavior. Some of these mood playlists kind of function in a similar way.
So it's not just about enjoying music for its own sake anymore, but using it for a specific purpose.
Yeah,
And this tactic isn't exactly new, is it?
not at all. It goes way back, Thomas Edison.
Mm.
Well, in 1921, his company published a guide called Mood Music. It basically categorized music by its supposed emotional impact. It was essentially a marketing ploy to sell more records and record players.
Wow, that's amazing. So this whole idea of mood music has been lurking in the background for over a century, but Spotify has certainly taken it to a whole new level.
Absolutely. And here's where things get really interesting. Remember all those mood playlists? Well, some of them may feature music by artists who don't actually exist.
Wait, what? You're saying some of these artists are fake, like made up by Spotify?
Exactly. It's part of their perfect fit content program. They commission these generic instrumental tracks from production companies at lower royalty rates. Then these tracks are released under made-up artist names, sometimes even with completely fabricated biographies.
Okay, that's mind-blowing. So they're creating their own artists to populate these playlists. Can you give me some details? Who should I be looking out for?
Well, there's the case of Ekfat, supposedly an Icelandic beatmaker with a detailed Spotify bio and features on popular playlists. Turns out he was entirely fabricated.
Wow, this is like something out of The Wizard of Oz, who's really pulling the strings behind the curtain. But why go to such lengths to create these fake artists?
It comes down to the bottom line. Spotify benefits financially from promoting this cheaper content. They curate playlists that maximize their profits potentially at the expense of real artists who actually deserve recognition and fair compensation.
That's pretty concerning. It seems like they're not just curating playlists, but they're actually shaping the very music itself.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to another key point: stream bait. The combination of Spotify's algorithm and this dominance of playlists has encouraged the creation of music that's tailored for maximum plays and algorithmic favor.
So instead of making the music they love, artists are being pressured to create music that's optimized for the algorithm. Does that mean we're losing out on creativity and diversity?
It's a legitimate concern. Consider how the 30-second listening threshold for royalty payouts has led to songs with super catchy intros and repetitive choruses. Artists are incentivized to create music that grabs your attention instantly and keeps you listening for at least that minimum duration.
It's like musical clickbait. Get them hooked quickly and keep them on the platform. But what about the artists? Are they being exploited in this system?
That's a valid question, and it leads to a very controversial aspect of Spotify. What some call algorithmic payola programs like Discovery Mode allow artists to essentially pay Spotify for algorithmic promotion by accepting lower royalty rates.
Hold on. So they're paying to get their music heard. Isn't that backwards? Shouldn't good music rise to the top naturally?
You'd think so. But in this environment, it's not always about the quality of the music. It's about gaming the system. And even Spotify employees have voiced concerns about the ethics of Discovery Mode and the lack of transparency for listeners.
So they're aware of the problem, but they haven't taken any action.
Yeah.
This is getting pretty shady.
Yeah, it raises some red flags. And things get even more complex when you consider the vast amount of data Spotify collects on us, the listeners. What are they doing with all that information?
That's something I've always wondered. They seem to know my taste so well, suggesting music I end up loving. But what else are they doing with my data?
It's not just personalized recommendations. They create these incredibly detailed user profiles that are valuable for targeted advertising and even sold to data brokers. They're categorizing listeners into very specific market segments, going way beyond just your music taste. There's even something called audio auras.
Audio auras? What in the world are those?
They use your listening data to categorize you into specific groups for targeted advertising. It's been suggested that these audio auras can reveal pretty sensitive information about users, potentially even income level and political affiliation.
That's creepy. It feels like a major invasion of privacy.
You're not alone in feeling that way. Many users have expressed concerns about the ethical implications of Spotify's data collection practices. It's not just about music anymore, it's about commodifying your personal information.
Wow. This deep dive has definitely taken a dark turn. It's clear the system has some major flaws, but are artists just taking this lying down?
Not at all. Musician-led organizations like the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, or UMAW, are fighting back. They're advocating for fairer pay, more transparency, and artist rights within this whole streaming landscape.
It sounds like there's a real battle brewing. What kind of actions are they taking?
Well, the UMAW launched the Justice at Spotify campaign, demanding a penny per stream, an end to these payola-like practices, and greater transparency in Spotify's dealings with the major labels. They've also been instrumental in developing the Living Wage for Musicians Act, a proposed piece of legislation that aims to create a new royalty stream paid directly to artists bypassing these exploitative contracts.
That's inspiring to hear. It's clear this isn't just about Spotify. It reflects these larger power dynamics in the music industry.
Exactly. And speaking of power dynamics, you brought up some pretty alarming information about Spotify's lobbying effort.
Oh, right. They've spent millions lobbying politicians primarily in their battle against Apple Music.
Yeah.
But it goes deeper than that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. They've lobbied on issues related to copyright and licensing, and even encouraged members of Congress to use their podcasting platform, Anchor.
So they're not just influencing how we listen to music, but they're actually trying to shape the laws that govern the entire music industry.
That's a crucial point. It raises questions about transparency and accountability. Whose interests are they truly serving? The artists, the listeners, or their own bottom line?
Yeah, it's a complex web for sure.
Yeah.
And it kind of connects to another point you brought up. Spotify's whole support for independent artists. They often position themselves as champions of the long tail. You know, claiming to give even niche artists a platform to reach wider audiences.
Right, that idea that everyone has a chance to be heard in this vast digital landscape. But does it actually play out that way in reality?
Well, some sources suggest that Spotify's actions don't always match their rhetoric. They highlight certain independent artists as these big success stories, like the musician Gregory Alan Isakov, who gained traction through Spotify playlists. Yeah, I've seen those Spotify billboards featuring up-and-coming artists. Seems like great exposure, but is it really helping them break through?
Well, while those billboards might look like support, some see them as more about marketing Spotify to artists than genuinely helping them succeed. And as for Isakov, even he admitted he wasn't sure how he landed on those crucial playlists. It wasn't a transparent process, more like winning the lottery.
So more about chance than a sustainable path to success for most independent artists.
I think that's a fair assessment. And this ties into a broader concern about the homogenization of sound on Spotify, Between the algorithm and what some call the playlist voice, a lot
Right.
of the music starts to sound the same.
Right, it's like everything is getting squeezed into this narrow lane to fit the algorithm and playlist formulas. And it's not just the sound. What about those Spotify-created microgenres? Solid Synthem, Escape Room, Metropolis. They even tried to claim ownership of the hyperpop genre, which originated organically outside of Spotify.
Exactly. It's all part of their effort to categorize and control the music landscape, often prioritizing data over artistic expression. And, this kind of brings us to another fascinating area you wanted to explore, Spotify's venture into AI.
You mean those personalized AI soundscapes that supposedly adapt to your mood and activity? I've seen ads for them, but I haven't tried them out yet.
Yeah, some critics argue that this is like the next evolution of functional music, blurring the lines even further between human creativity and algorithmic composition. Some even suggest it reduces artists to like STEM libraries for mood music.
Wait, so you mean they're taking bits and pieces of real artist music and then using AI to create these generic soundscapes?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And the major labels seem to be totally on board. They view it as another way to monetize their back catalogs.
Wow. So even AI is being co-opted by the industry, feeding into this cycle of homogenization and profit maximization. It's starting to feel a bit dystopian, to be honest.
It's definitely a valid concern. But it's important to remember that there are alternatives out there, different ways of approaching music creation and consumption. Think about those local music libraries we discussed earlier, like the Iowa City Local Music Project and Edmonton Public Library's Capital City Records.
Oh, right. Those were such inspiring examples of how music can be shared and celebrated outside the mainstream system, prioritizing community and local artists over profits and algorithms.
Exactly. They represent a more human-centered approach to music focusing on connection and shared experience. And there are other initiatives too, like artist-run collectives and cooperatives that are finding ways to operate outside these traditional industry structures.
It's definitely encouraging to hear about these alternative models,
Okay.
but can they really compete with the reach and resources of a giant like Spotify?
That's the big question. It's a David versus Goliath situation for sure. But it's important to remember that these grassroots efforts represent a different set of values, prioritizing community fairness and artistic expression.
It makes me think about the power we have as listeners. We're not just passive consumers. We can actually make choices that support the kind of music ecosystem we want to see thrive.
Absolutely. Being an informed listener is crucial. Question the algorithms, dig deeper than the surface level, and consider supporting artists directly.
You mean like checking out their Bandcamp pages, going to their shows, buying their merch?
Exactly. Let's not forget that music is created by real people who deserve to be fairly compensated for their work. And don't be afraid to explore beyond your usual listening habits. Discover new genres, find independent artists, and rediscover the joy of personally curated listening experiences. Remember the power of creating your own mixtapes, both literally and figuratively.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of the music industry, especially in this age of streaming.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with knowledge is power. The more we understand the systems that shape our cultural experiences, the more equipped we are to make conscious choices and contribute to positive change.
Well said. Thanks for guiding me through this complex landscape. I think I'm going to go listen to some music now, but with a whole new level of awareness.
And thank you, listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the music playing.
Yeah, it really is a David and Goliath situation. But it does give me some hope to hear about these grassroots efforts to kind of reclaim music from the grip of these huge corporations.
Yeah, they're important reminders that there are other ways of doing things, approaches that put, artists, communities, and a genuine love for music at the forefront.
It makes me think about those Spotify-created microgenres we talked about earlier, Solipsynthum, Escape Room, Metropolis. It's like they're trying to impose their own framework on music, prioritizing data over artistic expression.
You're right. And that framework often favors convenience over complexity. They want music to fit neatly into boxes, to be easily searchable, and ultimately monetizable.
It all starts to feel very sterile, like they're sucking the soul out of music.
Hmm. It's a valid concern. And this whole focus on data and categorization extends to their venture into AI with those personalized soundscapes that adapt to your mood and activity.
I've seen ads for those, but I haven't tried them yet. What's the issue with them?
Well, critics argue that they further blur the line between human creativity and algorithmic composition. Some even worry that these AI-generated soundscapes essentially turn artists into STEM libraries for mood music.
So they're taking pieces of real artists' music and then using AI to create these generic soundscapes. It's like music by Frankenstein.
That's essentially what's happening. And the major labels seem to be totally on board. They see it as just another way to monetize their back catalogs.
It's a bit unsettling to think about. It feels like this constant drive for profit is kind of overshadowing the love for music, the passion behind creating it.
It's a valid concern. But remember those local music libraries we talked about? The Iowa City Local Music Project and Edmonton Public Library's Capital City Records? They're kind of a breath of fresh air in this landscape, focusing on community and shared experience.
Those were such great examples. They remind us that music can be about connection and fostering local talent.
Exactly. And there are other initiatives too, like artist-run collectives and cooperatives that operate outside of these traditional industry structures.
It's encouraging to know that there are alternatives out there.
Yeah.
It feels like the future of music is at a crossroads with these powerful forces pulling in different directions. But we as listeners have a role to play too, right?
Absolutely. The choices we make as listeners have an impact. Supporting artists directly exploring beyond the algorithm and being mindful of the impact these technologies have on our culture are all important steps we can take.
It makes you want to dust off those old turntables and rediscover the joy of really listening to music, not just streaming it in the background.
That's a great idea. There's something special about intentionally engaging with music, savoring every note, and appreciating the artistry behind it. It's like slowing down to enjoy a home-cooked meal instead of grabbing fast food.
That's a perfect analogy. It takes more effort, but the rewards are so much greater.
Exactly. And just like cooking, creating, and sharing music is a labor of love, let's make sure we're valuing and supporting those who nourish us with their musical creations.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of the music industry, especially in this age of streaming.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with knowledge is power. The more we understand about the systems that shape our cultural experiences, the more empowered we are to make conscious choices and contribute to positive change.
Well, thank you for guiding me through this complex landscape. I know I'll be listening to music with a whole new perspective from now on.
And thank you, listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the music playing.